Okay, so today we're getting into the origin of like these land-living, kind of full-time terrestrial vertebrates, the amniotes, animals that are able to live their lives up on land and then also reproduce on land. When you guys watch lecture 10 on YouTube, we're talking a lot about those amphibians, some of which are quite capable up on land, but are probably tied to the water for their reproduction. So let's get into it today. This is where we kind of left off in lecture, where we had our amphibians, which, like I said, you guys are going to watch online. So that's this clade right here, this monophyletic clade called the Temnospondyli. The living amphibians, like frogs and salamanders, are those list amphibians up there related to these Paleozoic and early Mesozoic temnospondyls. Watch that online. Today, we're going to focus on this branch over here, which is the reptiliomorphs. So what that means is tetrapods, so animals that have 4 legs and can climb around up on land, but ones that are more closely related to the amniotes of today, that's today's reptiles and mammals, than they are to anything else. Many of these are very obviously living amphibious lives. And so I always like to think about this, like when you guys saw all those jawless fishes, and some of them were like outgroups to jawed vertebrates. They were stem gnathostomes. They still don't have jaws, but they're closer to jawed vertebrates. A lot of these animals are, stem amniotes. They are more closely related to the land-living, truly vertebrates of today, but they themselves might actually be amphibious still. Does that make sense? Cool. This is a meme, and I'm a millennial, and I need you to read it, and I don't care if you laugh or not. Does anybody, do we get this? Is this a joke we understand? I'm like barely at the cusp of being like an older person now, I think, and I don't think I'm ever going to give up this meme. Because it's so funny. And this song came out when I was in high school. And so, come on. Now you guys understand why atheistic is so fun. Okay. So here are some of those early amniote relatives. So stem amniotes, animals that are closer to amniotes than they are to today's amphibians. They're in the crown group tetrapods, but they're on our side of crown group tetrapods. So here's one clade that was just on that last slide, embolomeres. Here's another clade, these Croniasuchians. Here's another clade, these Samoriomorphs. Whoopsie. Do me a favor and talk to your neighbors. Tell me about these animals. What things can you infer? Which things seem interesting? What's going on with these? Chat with them, each other, please.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, they probably it's not like at least the most you can see their teeth. For sure. So you guys want to keep messing this out. Yeah. They're really like, yes, stop. Yes, it's yeah. Bigger show.
Yeah.
All right, what kind of things are we talking about? Yeah, Trevor.
EO that has
teeth. Yeah, lots of pointy teeth. Anthracosaurus. I like this drawing because it's such a nightmare little face. Anthracosaurus living in the water, almost certainly. That's cool. What other things? Yeah, Carmen.
It's not entirely clear based on these reconstructions, but it seems that some of them have scales and some of them might not.
So some of these Croniasuchians straight up have like armor going down their backs. They have like a crocodile-y kind of looking. That's why Suchus is in the name. Suchus is crocodile. Some of these animals have like full-on armor. Some of that armor is maybe for things like defense, like a lot of armor is today. But oftentimes the armor is like really closely tied to the vertebrae. You're seeing a vertebra there, an anterior view and lateral view. And then up on top, there's an osteoderm that's like fused onto that neural arch. And so oftentimes some early kinds of armor are like maybe structural. Like imagine these animals are out of the water for a lot of the time. And some of the support they can build into their bodies might be like via the armor, like helping hold them together up in their back. Rigidity down their vertebral column. I'm showing you guys all these. These are animals that always get skipped in paleo classes because people need to talk about camels and things like that. But I think it's important for you to see them because look at their times. Tens of millions of years of these animals living their best lives. And so it's really easy in these classes to be like, okay, now that we're up on land, boom, let's get to the dinosaurs. And we're gonna. But I just think it's really cool for you to know that like it's not like this exists for 10 minutes and then it's like selected against and other animals are more successful. All these different lineages go for tens of millions of years throughout the late Paleozoic, Carboniferous and Permian. And that I think is really fun. Definitely there's some different ecologies. Definitely there's some that are more terrestrial, some that are more aquatic. Again, I just love the biodiversity of it all. And I want you to see how diverse life on Earth has been, even though these are all clades that are now well and truly gone. Okay, so that was kind of those first few branches there, those embolamirs, the Carnisuchians, the Simoromorphs. As we get closer to amniotes, some of these animals start to do things that are like really, really, truly remarkable and really fun. So this next clade, and I put this in quotes because this is a very, very, very ongoing hotbed of research. The Lepospondyls are almost certainly not a clade. They're probably a grade, and some of them might be more closely related to us than others, kind of by a lot. It's totally up in the air right now, which is really exciting. I don't do this work super hard personally, but I've been involved a couple times and it's really fun. So is ISU. And so here's an early Lepospondyl. So this one's called Ophiderpaton. Nice reconstruction, nice skeleton up there. I'll let you look at it yourself. Here's another kind of Lepospondyl. It is not closely related to the one I just showed you. It is not closely related to the one I just showed you. What's cool about this is that many, many of these lineages totally lose or reduce their limbs. There's all kinds of stuff happening with dietary adaptations. These ones are called pantylids. They've got big old jaw muscles and stubby little teeth. There was a paper that came out. Oh, well, so I'll say this. We at ISU have been involved in the research on like these guys, which is really fun, understanding their ontogeny, how they grow up, and some of their taxonomy. There's these guys, very famous paleo animals, memes sometimes, the boomerang head looking amphibian guys, not related to today's amphibians, actually related to amniotes, the animal difficulus there. And then those things here in the middle with the big wide heads. There was a paper that came out last week, showing all of the teeth. This is the skull and ventral view. So you have your maxilla and your premaxilla, and then all these bones on the palate have these teeth. And the authors of that paper showed very convincingly that this animal almost certainly is practicing some level of herbivory because it has such a grinding surface on its palate and on its lower dentition. So we've got burrowers, leg reduction, leg loss, swimmers, walkers, probably herbivory. Do me a favor, talk to your neighbors. What seems cool about these animals?
So where they're saying the same thing because there's some absolutely. Four, six. So not done. Oh, wait. Someone else, right? Place. Yeah, that's yeah. That'd be slower. And all sorts of shit. Yes, actually, slows the I think first started so learns no arms. At least sometimes the discussion of
Just in case you haven't talked about it yet, I just want to make it really clear. Like little legs, little arms, just so much body in between, which is so great. If I showed you Ophiderpodon up there, that fossil, I mean, what would you say that was?
snake.
Duh, it's not a snake though. It's a reptiliomorph stem amniote. But yeah, I'll tell you what, it's given snake, but it's not. Leglessness happens kind of a lot. Return to worm, you guys. Return to worm. It's not uncommon. What other things are people just kind of talking about when they're looking at these weirdos? Yeah,
I
Ethan.
mean, since you pointed out, a lot of the limbs look kind of not useless, but not very not Yeah, not very specialized.
Maybe not specialized. These ones are probably pretty terrestrial. These ones that here, they're called panthylids. Oh, by the way, the one that got named last week, they named it Tyrannorotor, which is a fun name. Yeah. Again, what I want to show you here is this is again one of these like clades that usually gets like 2 seconds of airtime, and I'm not giving it much more than 2 seconds of airtime. But think about all the different evolutionary scenarios happening here. If you're involving burrowing, if you're returning to the water, or like living a really, really, truly aquatic life, like Diplocaulus up there. What is the deal with the boomerang? Nobody knows. The heads get bigger as they grow older. Like when they're little, they just have like normal looking faces with like some corners on. And then as they grow up, so is it sexual? Maybe. Limb loss, limb reduction, and then things like panthylids potentially being some of the first vertebrates to be doing like herbivory, like munching up on ferns or whatever. This is just really, really cool. You can imagine this is a very rich biological study system. I kind of love it. And I just wanted you to see it because it's like, man, they're in the Carboniferous, they're in the Permian. They probably don't make it quite to the end of the Permian, but man, cool stuff. That's all I got to say about them. But if we keep going up the tree, there's other animals that are on the amniote stem. These are a long-lived like clade that some people have very recently thought were actually true reptiles. I haven't even updated my slide because we actually are very confident now that they're stem amniotes. But these guys have a lot of really weird stuff going on, these Captorinids. And so do me a favor, that's the skull in right lateral view. This is the skull in ventral view. This is one of the lower jaws, and you're seeing it in dorsal view, looking down on it. What's going on with that lower jaw? Talk to your neighbors about that.
Yes. Yeah, you can see it. Oh, it's like a lot. It's like you just, you know, like. Don't have necessarily teeth, and they have this sort of-
So
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's something interesting.
I hear you guys talking about some pretty cool stuff. So if you imagine like a skull, there's the roof of your mouth, there's the palate of your mouth. So these animals have a big field of teeth on the palate of their mouth, kind of like the panthylids I just showed you. But these lower jaws, they have like a shelf that comes medially, like off their jaw, like it's a normal jaw, and then there's a shelf that's covered with teeth to meet those teeth that are up on the roof of the mouth. So this is another lineage of stem amniotes that are almost certainly like grinding and grinding and grinding. We can actually see the wear patterns on all these weird little teeth. And this is another example where we think there's like some kind of herbivory happening. So as the Permian unfolds, something you guys are going to see, and we're going to talk about it again and again and again, terrestrial ecosystems with vertebrates like up at the top really start to come into their own. And it's really from the Permian on that we have animals that we would call like terrestrial herbivores. And that niche space is always filled. There's a lot of different things that make it challenging to be an herbivore. The food is very abundant, easy to find plants, but plants are much less nutritious per bite and per unit effort than things like meat once you have your prey in front of you, of course. It's hard to catch stuff. Trade-offs for meat and plants. But so especially plants back in the Paleozoic, you can imagine things like ferns or horsetails or some of these early seed plants, they're not like a beautiful fruit or a nut. It's probably quite a lot of work to grind it all up and get the nutrients out. And so as we go through a lot of these animals, the ones that start dabbling in herbivory, I think you guys are going to see there's all these different ways to overcome the challenge of like, how do you eat relatively low nutrient food? Some of these Captorinids evolve ridiculous tooth anatomy that nobody else has. And we think grind up their plant material. Isn't that fun? I think it's fun. Here's another clade, one tick closer to amniotes. They're called Diadectomorphs. Some of them we do not think are herbivorous. I'll let you decide if you think why. Like every fourth grader at a museum when I have a sharp tooth and a flat tooth and we say, which one do you think is the meat eater? But what's cool is there's an animal up there, Diadectes. Diadectes is one of these stem amniotes. It kind of has a big old fat gut. We're going to talk about that as we get later into herbivory. Plant matter also can be processed in your digestive system. You can process it in your face by orally processing it, mashing it, chewing it, mashing it, chewing it. You also can process plant matter in your guts if your guts are elongated and there's a long time for the plants to be digested and get every little piece of nutrients out. Do you guys know anything about herbivores today? Horses, elephants, whatever you want. There's different ways these same animals meet these exact same challenges of being an herbivore. Diadectes does not have weird teeth on the roof of its mouth. Check your neighbors, what's going on with Diadectes. That's the skull and ventral view there. All right, what's going on with the Diadectes? What are we talking about? Yeah, Caden.
It's got kind of a horse-like.
It looks like a horse, kind of. It's kind of has what I would call also those front teeth. None of these teeth are yet developmentally synonymous with the words you and I might use for our teeth. Like we have incisors and canines and premolars and molars. Those are all going to come in amniote evolution later. But we would say those front teeth are kind of incisive form. They're in the front positions. They look kind of like incisors. They're definitely procumbent is the word. They stick anteriorly. So there's a little bit of a nippy situation in the front. And then how about the back teeth? Yeah.
They look flat, right? Kind of.
Flat, certainly like wide. You guys remember medialaterally? These are like medialaterally expanded teeth. They're kind of big. They're not sharp and they're wide. And so you have a nipping maybe in the front and a chewing, grinding in the back. It's still grinding maybe like the Captorinid you just saw is grinding, but the Captorinid is like, here's a million little nubs. And this one's like, here's some high investment, wide individual teeth. I'm still grinding, doing it in a slightly different way. That's really, really, really fun. And so these are some of the animals that people are really, really comfortable and have been for many, many decades now, calling some of the first terrestrial herbivores. That's really fun. So you see incisiform teeth, molariform teeth, and then a big old gut for processing that plant matter. One thing I like about Diadectes for you guys to think about is like, these are really close to Amniota, the crown group Amniota. Snake over here, bird over here, that's their common, oh, sorry, mammal over here, snake over there. We could say reptiles and mammals, the common ancestor, that's Amniota. This is like one tick or so out, maybe 2 ticks out from Amniota. Are these animals laying eggs on land? They might be. We don't really know. So it's fun to think about when the amniote egg might have shown up. Some of these animals like Diadectes are in places like Oklahoma and Texas that when they were there were like quite dry ecosystems. And a lot of the animals they were found alongside are amniotes for sure. So it's interesting to think about. Phylogenetically, not amniotes, but maybe they had the egg. Don't know. So, a thing for you guys to know, because I think this is like very important, just like general vertebrate biology, is that big old clade up there, Amniota, today's reptiles and mammals. We have a really nice constraint for diversifying, splitting from each other in the late part of the Carboniferous. So that means reptile line and mammal line are splitting back in those big old coal swamps and not in the Permian. But over the course of the Permian, we can kind of see the mammal line evolve to get pretty mammally and the reptile line evolve to get towards kind of today's reptiles. It's always been sort of a funny conversation to have, though, because the reptiles of today even sort of are like more plesiomorphic, sharing ancestral features. A lizard still kind of looks like some of this stuff, right? So it's kind of tough. Mammals look really derived, really different. A lot of reptiles today still kind of look like a lot of the ancestral forms, but there's still reptile evolution and mammal evolution that we're going to be able to track within Amniota during the Permian. And what's cool, I think, about that also is we can use DNA and other methods of prediction to like molecularly estimate the amniote divergence and then find fossils that help us understand the details, which is really cool. All right. I like this piece of art so much. It's getting to be a little older now. It's 8 years old. This was the title slide. There is so much excellent scientific information in this image, and it's just very pretty. Please do me a favor. There's all kinds of observations to be made. Read those questions and talk to your neighbors.
Down. Yes, for some reason, they almost lost sense. Fungi underneath the trees. Got something about fungi. Yeah, funky looking trees are those. That's just trees. So breathe. Yeah, you know, it actually is. It's like some of the lorax. Is that moss brown? Is that what that looks like to you guys? Because that doesn't look like grass. It's like moss. Yeah. Well, yeah, there are little grasses that thing right there, but like literally grass. Oh, it's okay. That they had it in all different. Yeah. They definitely are. Those look like different places.
So this is like pretty like art history of me, but like what things are you guys noticing in this beautiful artwork that could be of significance? Yeah, Brooklyn.
The biggest one is there are eggs, not in the water.
There are eggs not in the water. Great. What else? Yeah.
I noticed there were a lot of like downed trees for some reason.
Yeah, a lot of these like weird club moss trees, weird palmy, ferny looking relatives. A lot of them are broken or down. I like that.
It's just the but the lizard of the right has three toes up one foot five.
I think it's probably the angle.
This could be like a little
And
example of like a male, like difference in coloration and characteristics that like attract like a mater.
Could be male, female up here. If you think it's male, female, who's who?
Say that male's colorful.
Male's the more colorful one, female's the brown one, maybe. What else? I'm gonna see who else that's up. Who hasn't said anything yet? Yeah, Ken. Red on the head is like a epistematic coloring, just scare something. Like that's why some snakes are like orange and black and stuff, right? Could be, yeah. I'll tell you right now, we don't actually have the color of these animals. I'm just, enjoying what's happening here. What else? What if, actually, I wonder if I put it on there or not. Yeah, I'll just tell you guys. So I really like the collapse of these rainforests. At the end of the Carboniferous, the world starts to get really arid and we get the formation of the Pangean supercontinent finally. And so these forests dry out and collapse relatively quickly. They've been pretty stable for tens of millions of years, mostly in the tropics. And that's, like I said before, that's where all of our coal deposits come from these like forests and what are eventually going to be North America and Europe. And that's the place of evolution of a lot of this vertebrate stuff we're talking about. This piece of art like delighted me when it came out because the one on the left and the one on the right are, I know they look the same, right? One of them is one of the earliest mammal line animals and the other one is one of the earliest reptile line animals. And the point is, get out of your time machine in the Carboniferous, they both just look like little lizards. One of them is related to elephants. One of them is related to flamingos, and they both look like little lizard things. That's real nice. But yes, both living up on land. I liked this artwork when I first saw it also because this artist, she made the choice to make the reptile all colorful and the mammal all brown. But of course, they're not real reptiles or real mammals yet. But giving that like hint of the future with these kind of colors. So this is this context for this amniote split. You can imagine this amniote common ancestor probably looks a lot like what you guys would get out of your time machine and call a lizard, but it's not. It's just what an early amniote looks like. Today's lizards still share, again, plesiomorphically, ancestrally inheriting, not necessarily derived features, but a lot of basic features that kind of look a lot like this. And they kind of always have. That's interesting. Does that make sense? Anyway, I like it so much. So here is our tetrapod family tree. We are going to have list amphibians, like I said, in that lecture that'll get posted. But on the other side of tetrapoda are these amniota. And so you guys just met, tick, 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 a whole bunch of clades of animals that are extinct in this part of the tree. But remember, this is the modern phylogeny. And then, so this node, Amniota, is a late Carboniferous split between the mammal line on one side and the reptile line on the other side. We're going to blow all those up, of course, as we keep going through this class. I've got two synapomorphies, two shared and derived features. I want you guys to remember for Amniota, one of them, just like vertebrata, just like Gnathistomata, is real obvious. But it's the amniotic egg. That's why it's called Amniota. So, talk to your neighbors for a second. Do you recognize these three hatching babies? I mean, there's more than three, but three species. Just chat with each other.
Maybe it is some sort of. Is that what Moses is supposed to be bird? I guess so.
All right, so who's hatching? I see a crocodile, little crocodile faces. Who are these guys? Little boa, little snake faces. And then who's this?
Is it a bird? I don't know.
Yeah, this is a little egg-laying mammal. This is a baby echidna. So in Australia, you can watch echidnas and platypuses hatch out of eggs, just like a regular normal amniote should, which is hatch out of an egg. So there are still, thankfully, 7 species of mammal alive right now that lay eggs in a nest, that those eggs hatch, and a little mammal comes out, gets its fur, drinks its milk, does its thing. Mammals and reptiles, bizarrely, share a common ancestor. Reptiles don't go with amphibians. Herpetology is a flawed concept, sorry to say. Reptiles and mammals share a common ancestor, and that ancestor has this amniotic egg. And so amniotic eggs are really important. They're analogous to like the seeds of seed plants. So not ferns, but things like conifers and flowering plants. Seed plants can live away from water. They can reproduce away from water. They can have their babies away from water. The amniotic egg is kind of analogous to a seed. What's important about it actually isn't the details of like the shell. It's not about the shell. It's about a layer within the egg that the baby actually develops in. This little amniotic sac surrounds the embryo. Here's an amniotic egg for you guys to look at. I'll let you think about like Sunday morning breakfast. Next time you make yourself something, crack it open on the countertop, right? Crack it open, fry your egg. Look for these pieces. You're not going to see an amnion because the eggs aren't fertilized, probably, that you're using to make your omelet. But you do know about yolks in eggs. And then there's this big whitey kind of part, and then the really light white part. Amniotic eggs are different because once it gets fertilized, a baby starts developing, and this envelope around the baby is that amnion, around that little embryo and then around that little fetus. It's not the shell that makes an amniotic egg. It's this little pond. And I want you to think about it like that. It's a little pond away from any real pond. The baby is still a little fishy thing in there as it develops. The yolk sac, which is full of nutrients, and then this structure here, which is where the waste goes after the baby uses and metabolizes what's in the yolk sac. Those are things that are shared with fishes and amphibians too. But the amnion, this little pouch for the baby, is what's really, really different. I love it so much. It's really cool. Something that's like really interesting for you to think about biologically. These are frog egg clusters. So frogs have to reproduce in water. Not only do their babies not have like this hard shell, of course, on the egg at all, as they're in the water, but also as those embryos developing, they don't have an amnion around them, like this cute little baby crocodile in its little sac. When a human woman is giving birth, she will have her water break, amniotic sac has ruptured, baby's gotta come out now. That's that moment in placental evolution, still attached to a yolk sac though. One thing that I think is really, really interesting for you guys to think about, though, is that amniotic eggs have to be fertilized, and the fertilization happens internally, almost always within inside the body of the female parent. And that means there's all kinds of amazing ecological things that start to happen, because there's like mate choice. Frogs and fishes, not always, but sometimes, sperm and eggs get sprayed around in the water, kind of random. There's all kinds of adaptations that come in. There's a bunch of reptile penises for you, to mean that like actual anatomy has to be evolved to do internal fertilization, to keep the pond inside the body. You're gonna have to put your waters together. I know that's gross, and I'll only say it that one time. But that's really, really, really cool. And that means that the males can develop methods of competing with each other in order to get selected to be a mate. That means the females can exercise discretion on who they're mating with. And there's a bunch of evolutionary and ecological things that you guys can imagine are downstream of that. A lot of the dimorphism we might end up seeing. I think that's cool. The other feature, besides the amniotic egg, that I want you guys to have for Amniota is lateral temporal fenestration. Now, this is a great feature because unlike the amniotic egg, we can actually find this in fossils. You can't find amniotic eggs usually as fossils. That doesn't really make sense. But lateral temporal fenestration, so what is that? What you're looking at up there is a right lateral view of a skull of, let's say, an early tetrapod, tetrapodomorph kind of guy, reptiliomorph kind of guy. There's an orbit and a nose up in the front, a bunch of teeth on the maxilla, the premax. Then there's all those bones in the back of the skull. They're all kind of cinched up. In all amniotes, the ancestral condition is to have a single hole in the back of the skull. That hole is called a fenestra. Fenestra means window. And that window is not where the eyeball goes. You know, if you go to a museum, you might see a dinosaur skull and you're like, which one's the eyeball hole? The one in the back is not the eyeball hole. That is where jaw muscles attach. So as these animals are living increasingly terrestrial lives, they're using their jaws in more ways. And having an increased area for muscles to attach onto is a way to allow the jaw to do all kinds of different things. So it's still the eyeball up front, nose up front, eyeball in the middle, and then a lateral, a side temporal fenestra. And so here's like a dinosaur, like Stegosaurus, a good old amniote. And so you can see there's a bunch of holes going on there, but this is that lateral temporal fenestra in a reptile like Stegosaurus. Still got the nose and the eyeball. And then over here is one of our relatives. This is Synapsid, Dimetrodon on the mammal line, one of our cousins. Nose, eyeball, and this big hole in the side of the skull. That's that lateral temporal fenestra in a mammal line amniote. And that's really cool. For a long time, it was really controversial whether or not the amniote common ancestor would have had any hole at all, or if the reptiles and mammals each evolved kind of these jaw muscle holes on their own. Some of the research we've done at ISU has helped contribute to the fact that we're very, 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 very confident now to say that the fenestra itself is a common thing for all amniotes, that side one. So it makes sense to me why that's a really helpful feature, because now we can like look for holes in skulls and be confident potentially about who's an amniote and who might not be an amniote. So there's those two features, those two amniote features, the egg and the lateral temporal fenestration on our time-calibrated phylogeny there. Cool. We're going into the Permian now, and the Permian is awesome. We're going to be in the Permian all next week and a little bit the week after that too. So talk to your neighbors, look at this map of Pangaea, and tell me what's going on in the Permian.
We got a lot of acid. Yeah, there's ice. Yes. We got some more dry land right now. Everything's green. Still, you know, we got some more deserts. Yeah. Yeah. More islands, but that might not be it for a state of that. Right. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, well,
There's some yeah. Feel like we're missing it. It's really almost out full.
All right, what are some things you guys are talking about with the Pangaea map? Permian Pangaea. There's also a Triassic Pangaea you're going to see later, but this is Permian Pangaea. Yeah.
See some deserts.
Yeah, deserts, dry spaces. If you go north and south of the equator, about the same distance, deserts. We have that same pattern today, by the way. That's where the deserts are today.
got a lot of ice south.
Big old continental glaciation. That melts out pretty quick in the Permian. It's there in the end Carboniferous, and it's there in the early parts of the Permian, but it does melt out. I think that part that I wrote there last time is incredibly just awesome. When the ice caps melt away in the Permian, there's no more permanent ice caps on this planet until about 30 million years ago. So from now until there's like things that look like horses, we never really have ice in a big way on the continents. It's really cool. You guys live in an ice world right now. Humans evolved in an ice world. But for so much of the last 300 million years, it's like, oh no, that's not what's usually the case. That's controversial to some people because they're not thinking about the scale correctly. We'll get to it when we get to it. What else? Nothing? That's cool. Permian is really important because there are at least two pretty serious mass extinction events. And the one at the very, very end of the Permian, the skull and crossbones way up at the top there, is the end Permian mass extinction. We're going to talk about it, don't worry. And if you think about it, the end Permian is the end of the Paleozoic era. So we've had almost 250 million years of time: Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian. And that one's so bad that even in the 1800s, they're like, yo, let's break this up. These are really different fossils on either side of this line. So we're going to get to that one. It's really, really interesting. Up on land, you're getting to see a lot of these seed plant lineages spread. Things like conifers, ginkgos, cycads. Things like flowering plants have a ghost lineage. We don't have fossils for them, but they like should exist. So we either don't have them yet or we're not recognizing them yet. They're certainly not flowers yet or anything like that. But that's what's going on. Lots of those insects keep diversifying. Things like wasps, beetles, they're showing up in the Permian, which is really cool. For us, amniotes, a lot of really cool things happen. Most important to me is that we kind of get these familiar terrestrial trophic pyramids: apex predators, secondary predators, big-bodied herbivores eating plants. That wasn't the case in the Carboniferous. In the Carboniferous, most of the vertebrates, whether they were on land or not, are probably carnivorous, or at least semi-carnivorous. You saw some of them might be grinding plants, I guess, but they're not great big giant animals. We start to get big herbivores and then the predators that eat them in the Permian for the first time on land. Mostly the mammal line animals, the mammal amniotes, which are called synapsids. We're going to talk about them on Thursday and all next week. That's our lineage. They have the best, quote unquote, best fossil record of the Permian. We have so many species and so many things to talk about. The reptile line is a little messier, and that's what we're going to talk about the rest of the day today during the Permian. What I think is cool, though, is that all kinds of things keep happening. Burrowers, tree climbers, gliders, kind of advanced seeming ways to move your body, to locomote, going back into the oceans, even though you're a self-respecting land animal. It starts to happen even in the Permian. These are patterns that we'll see again and again and again. Lineages evolving to do the same things over and over and over in different contexts. This picture down here at the bottom is a picture from the early Permian, a nice piece of art from the early Permian. There's your boomerang head guy. There's a couple of big dragonfly things still around. These are all mammal relatives with the scales on their back, Dimetrodon. That's the early Permian world. The late Permian world's a little more intense in a lot of ways. And so there's some of our big mammal relatives up there with their big herbivore they just took down. We got some reptiles, we got some non-amniotes, we got some mammal relatives, some cool plants. We're going to talk about it. I think the Permian's really a weird and bizarro time. Nothing's quite familiar yet. It's all a little off-putting, and that's what I like about it. We'll get after it. Okay, so here's a little bit of time calibration again for these major clades of vertebrates we have today. Here's a bunch of these amniote stem animals, close relatives of ours, but not within the crown group. Here's where they are stratigraphically distributed. Some of them go almost all the way up to the boundary itself. Then we have our amniotic common ancestor, mammals on one side, today's reptiles on the other side. I'm going to show you guys a bunch of stuff about Permian reptile evolution today. I'm really proud to say that so much of what I'm about to show you in terms of how the phylogeny is structured is like the work of this lab, my lab, Idaho State Research, which is really, really, really exciting. And I'll show it to you here in a second. But we had a bunch of papers come out in the last year or two and a bunch more still to come. And they are really helping us understand reptile evolution in the Permian in a way that we just couldn't before. I'll tell you that also a little bit later today. So that's our crown groups. Here's what they really look like back then, as always. Not a magpie, not a cobra, not a possum, but these guys, which are looking a little more like animals you might expect to exist in the Permian, maybe the early part of the Triassic. And so we'll talk about those in a second. But if we go on this side of Amniota, we're on the reptile side. And as you probably will imagine by now, there's a whole bunch of animals that are reptile stem animals, closer to reptiles than to mammals, but still their own things. See? So many. And they're really cool and really weird, and they do a bunch of really fun stuff. So let's talk about them. Here's these three early clades. Arioslidians, bolosaurs, mesosaurs. Again, you guys aren't responsible, of course, for all these names, but I'm giving them to you in case you want to poke around or learn anything yourself. So there's some Arioslidians. Here's a bolosaur. Here's a mesosaur. Tell me about these guys. What do you think is interesting about them?
I don't think it's running away from it. It's just that's a passage. Yeah, it's like Mesosaur is one of the beasts that don't remember. Or rather, it has what you tell us that I've got it. Yes, so this basically going to be still. The spot thing. Pretty sure there's all that guy's friends eyes.
Like the other. Pretty like.
It's like.
Feel like.
I did not know. It's like. Oh, it's a whole signal. No. First one. I see. No one's gonna start. Oh.
All right, what things seem worth talking about with these guys? What? What'd you say? Oh, okay, okay. Trevor, what's up?
So you did
Utabamus.
the Bamus, it kind of like that artistic like interpretation.
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of, I forgot what it's called. There's a lizard today that like.
A basilisk lizard?
The basilisk lizard,
Yeah.
like its proportion stuff kind of remind me of.
So the people who described Utabamus made that note that it's got really great big long hind legs. And so it's not for sure or anything, but there's lizards today that have proportions that are kind of like Utabamus, like the basilisk, which famously can like run on water, which are maybe like facultatively, which means they can do it, doesn't mean they always do it, facultatively, bipedal. So it's always reconstructed as being a little running around on two legs. Not 100% sure about that, of course. And some of the other bolosaurs we know about are definitely very normal limb proportions, but Utabamus has real long legs. It'd be fun if that was possible. Another thing I'm not showing you on here, this animal is representing the bolosaurs. It's part of a much bigger group. They have like great big molary teeth, great big crushing, chewing teeth, and nobody really knows what they're doing with them. Fun. What else?
Mesosaurus.
What about it?
It's like webbed feet, a long tail, presumably for like maybe move around the water.
So if you guys look, you're looking at this Mesosaurus, you're looking at it in a dorsal view. Can you all find the sacrum? Okay, so the transverse processes sticking off the side of those proximal caudal vertebrae, the front part of the tail, they're really big and wide. You can imagine great big muscles. Well, I mean, this is not a huge animal, but muscles can attach there. And then the rest of the tail is really long and kind of paddly. And so it's probably a very good swimmer. It also has a very long pointy face. I should have put a picture up here of its skull. You can kind of see the teeth up there. It has great long needle teeth that like interact like this when the mouth is closed. This is the kind of ecology we would expect from a very fish catching type of reptile. A lot of reptiles have big, sharp, long, thin teeth that interact like that for snatching up little things like fish. Mesosaurs also have ribs. Look at those ribs. Doesn't it look like something's wrong with them? They're great, big, thick, they call them sausage ribs. Their ribs get really, really dense and fat in all dimensions. A lot of mammals do that later in time, and a lot of reptiles do it later in time. It's a way to create ballast in your body. These are all air-breathing animals, but for swimming around, you can be heavier with these big, dense ribs. Manatees are a good example of something that still does something like that. And mesosaurs are actually the first example we have in the fossil record of a secondarily marine amniote. So a reptile in this case that goes back into the oceans and lives a life swimming around catching fish, even though it's an air-breathing, egg-laying animal. Really cool. Mesosaurs are also quite fun because these are one of the 4 fossil organisms that helped geologists try to argue that the continents used to move, because all the mesosaur fossils in the world are from southern Africa and Brazil. And if you just put them together, they're from one place. And so mesosaurs back in the 60s and 70s was one of the animals that's like, yeah, and the mesosaurs are good evidence that Africa and South America used to be together. I think that's really fun. A lot of these other guys look kind of like what you might expect early reptiles to look like, I'm going to say. Terrestrial, four legs, lizard vibes. That's cool. Ankyramorphs are another one of these reptile lineages. You can see they go from the Carboniferous all the way through the Permian, all the way up off the slide. These Ankyramorphs are incredibly successful. You guys might hear people talk sometimes. They'll say the word para-reptile. That's not a word I'm going to use very much. These animals are part of that former group. And so these Ankyramorphs are really intense. There's a lot of them. If you go look for fossils in the Permian, in certain parts of the world, you are going to find animals in this clade. Here's some of these small ones, like Procolophon and Teratophon over there. You can see they have these awesome horns and spurs kind of on their faces. That there is one of my colleagues, Roger. You can see he's holding a beautiful Procolophon. The skull is up on the top there. And then there's little hands like this. That's a fossil from Antarctica, from when we were doing field work in Antarctica. So there's this little tiny reptile thing sitting there perfectly in this rock. But some of the Ankyramorphs are quite huge. These animals, I'm going to show you more of in a second, are called pariasaurs. There's a lot of them. They are some of the largest reptiles in the whole of the Paleozoic. They've got great big guts. They've got interesting teeth that actually have this sort of leaf shape to them. There's lots of little cusps all over them. So not like sharp teeth, not simple teeth. They're kind of complex. Only up here in the dentary maxilla premax, you can see that toothy smile. That's a front-looking view. This is the palate, looking at the roof of the mouth. So there's those same teeth. They also have some little weirdo teeth on the roof of their mouth there. And these animals are thought to be some of those really big early terrestrial herbivores, animals that are lumbering around, eating plants and processing them back there in their guts. What I think is cool, look at that arrow up there. This lineage of Ankyramorphs almost totally goes extinct at the end of the Permian. We're going to talk about the mass extinction later in class. They were quite rich all throughout the Permian, but two lineages actually, tiny little guys, do survive, and they totally re-radiate in the Triassic. And so for another 50 million years, they keep going on. But this is a really fun group of reptiles, and I really wish there were like two in New Zealand that were still alive. They're not, which is such a bummer. But they do survive into the Mesozoic, into dinosaur time, which is really cool. I want to tell you a little bit more about these big guys, the pariasaurs. They're just like so awesome. I like them very much. What's that? That's my hand, by the way. What am I holding? It does look like a mushroom. Yeah, it is a skewed. It's a little piece of armor. These guys are usually like covered in armor. And so like, here's how big they can get. So there's this nice like lady. Here's like a pariasaur for scale with the big old cheeks, big old plant-eating teeth, big old fat gut. And so they're covered in these little things called osteoderms that have these little raised pieces. And so that skeleton that you can see up there is on display in New York City, but it doesn't have any of its armor on. And there's me finding some loose armor in Zambia. One of my favorite fossils I've ever found is one of these animals. It was a beautiful skeleton with a skull, all the ribs, tons of armor pieces. It was on the surface. This was in Zambia. And I was very pleased about it, but it was just a piece of junk because Cape buffalo, like the buffalo that lions are always hunting, had like stepped on it 100,000 times as they walked through. And so this fossil was like totally not worth collecting, even though it obviously was at one point a beautiful whole pariasaur skeleton. And the reason it's one of my favorite fossils I've ever found is because I'm like, you and you are the same thing. You're big fat herbivores eating plants, and you both lived in the same spot. You've been dead for 260 million years, and I can see you walking around over there. Actually, you stepped on him, but ecologically, really similar. And so I think that's just really fun, really cool stuff. I want to show you this because I think, oh yeah, Cody, what's up?
Do we know if these like really large reptiles are ectotherms like we have today?
Great question. Yeah, I would say that is our default assumption, is that they should be. ectothermic. We can certainly cut their bones and look at how they grow, and they do not grow like rapidly. They grow like a lot of reptiles today that can get to weights like this, like great big crocodiles can get to be weights like this. But yeah, we don't have any expectation that, especially within this clade, there would be anything especially interesting. That's a great question though, because they're big, right? Once things start to get big, things get interesting. Something that does happen in animal physiology is the larger you get, the easier it is to retain whatever heat you have. So there are animals today, like great big leatherback sea turtles, that are like functionally pretty warm-blooded because they're always digesting all the time and burning metabolism. And so they're so big, they don't lose that heat. So they're actually pretty warm. They're warmer than the ocean they're swimming in, but they're not like you are, like with an active mammalian metabolism. They're kind of doing it passively, which is really cool. I don't think I would say I would expect anything like that for these guys, but that's a great thing to be thinking about. And I encourage you guys to think about that kind of stuff. This I want to show you because it's just so spectacular and fun. So Scutosaurus is one of these genera of pariasaurs. I wonder what you think about this room just at a glance. It's amazing to me. There's all this chandelier. There's all these bas reliefs on the walls of all these awesome Permian animals. And then there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's so many skulls of Scutosaurus. This is from like early 1900s and late 1800s, early 1900s is Russia, when like the Tsar and then after him, like the communists, like excavated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pariasaurs. America at the time had Triceratops and T-Rex, and then the Russians needed theirs. And so they dug up all of these pariasaurs, which is so awesome. And so if you ever go, not like you're going to do that now, if you ever go to Moscow and you go to the museum, this is something that I saw when I went to that museum. I went 2017 and it was like pariasaurs in this like beautiful shrine. Do you love it? I love it so much. They also have like a bunch of them mounted, not one, like a bunch, whole skeletons. So cool. They never get the love they deserve, but they're really cool. All right, so you've seen now these guys, these Arioslidians, these bolosaurs, these swimming mesosaurs. I kind of did a little trick there and showed you that one before I showed you these ones, but that's okay, don't worry about it. Here's those Ankyramorphs. The rest of the story, as we get close to the actual crown group reptiles, are all animals that like seem relatively basic, and it's really important. This is like one of my like proudest stories. This is something that happened in my lab with Dakota and Carmen's like former lab mates who've now graduated from Idaho State. If you guys don't know, when we go to the museum, you're going to see it. We have on our campus the Idaho Virtualization Lab. It is like an incredible place to do like CT processing. So actually scanning like delicate teeny fossils of reptiles with really powerful x-rays, and then digitally going in there and looking at anatomy no one's ever seen before, like of their brains or of their ears. That's really, really fine. Because all these really early relatives of today's reptiles are tiny little delicate fossils. Here's these two animals here, Milleropsis milleretta. That's a figure from when they were last kind of described in the literature from the 70s. So we can kind of see the outside of their bones. We can see their maxilla. We can count how many teeth they have. But one of my former students, he, as part of his dissertation, we took these little skulls, they're like this big, to a particle accelerator and then got super powerful x-rays by blasting them with particles from a particle accelerator. And then we were able to see this teeny little detailed anatomy inside their bodies. This one's milleretta from the top, and that one's Milleropsis. Here's what it looks like in the lab down at the museum. Do you love it? I'll show you both. So we were able to see all this anatomy that no one had ever been able to see before. And especially in the ear, but also in the brain, these little weirdos have a lot in common with today's crown group reptiles. Before we did this, everyone always used to think these animals were related to those Ankyramorphs I just showed you, because like some of their outside bones look like their outside bones. But when we see like things like this, 3 semicircular canals, all gnathostomes have 3 semicircular canals up there. Details of how the ears work and how the brain works helped us reconstruct a ton of the pattern of evolutions within Permian reptiles. I'm like so incredibly proud of this. At the end of the day, these guys are still looking like little lizard things. But importantly, they're helping us see little bits of detail for how those animals evolved. So if we go one more jump up there, there's a bunch of these animals that people have known for a long time as close relatives of today's reptiles, but also for their own reasons, quite confusing. So we've worked on these also in my lab here at Idaho State, gynids, tangosaurs, wageltisaurs. I'll let you look at them for a second. I'll walk around the room. What's going on with these guys? Why would interpreting their evolutionary relationships be difficult? All right, talk to each other.
Yeah.
Maybe it's live on land, in water, and gliding.
That's why it would be hard, is because it's all.
Upright, it's funny, right, but fuck like. Or to go on around. It was very different.
Like.
All right, what's cool about these? What's weird about these? Wings. So this one, this is a nice skeleton, this animal Biogeography here. There's a hand, there's a skull, and then there's these things, which are big rib extensions. So there are lizards today in Southeast Asia that like jump out of trees and they don't use their arms, they don't use their legs, they have like rib extensions. They go Batman style, and then they can like glide to the next tree. So we have gliding reptiles in the late part of the Permian using not their limbs. Very cool, very weird. These fossils, for better or for worse, are almost always in 2 dimensions. They're smashed totally flat, so it's really hard to see details of their skull because the whole thing is smeared. So if you turn it on its side, it's so thin, you can't see those details. But you get whatever you get when you get these 2-dimensional preservations. So yeah, some ecological diversity there with the gliding. What else? What about these top ones? What's going on with these top ones? And that one, Claudiosaurus, isn't actually thought to be related to these ones over here called tangosaurs, but they're all swimming around in the oceans. Their fossils are from very cool places: Madagascar, Kenya, Tanzania, Indian Ocean coast. Really fun. When you guys imagine Pangea, these swimming guys are all from like the big armpit inside Pangea, where it's like nice and safe in warm waters in the tropics. Really interesting to imagine little, vaguely lizardy reptiles flirting with becoming secondarily marine, kind of like marine iguanas in the Galapagos today. These ones have great big feet. The tangosaurs have great big tails that this one does not have at all for like probably swimming around. So when you have swimmers and gliders, there's a lot of anatomy that gets changed because they're adapting to locomote in these different ways. And that means unless you can like do that scanning thing and like see the details inside the skeletons, it could be really hard to understand with real confidence who's related to who, because they just kind of are so different from a gross anatomy perspective. And so these guys have always been reconstructed as being pretty close to today's reptiles, but on the outside. Work on these other ones called young gynids, just kind of a little lizard guy up there on my symbol, also stuff we've done here in the lab. And so there's an undergraduate in my lab now who is one of the authors on a paper looking at this animal that we also took to that particle accelerator and came up with this awesome name, Silacerta. Combination of Lacerta, which is lizard, and Scylla. If you guys remember the Odyssey, there's like a multi-headed dragon thing that lives inside of a burrow. This animal is one of like 6 or 7 bodies that are all tied around each other that were found in a little burrow. So this is, I think, just like a 5-star name. And we can reconstruct all kinds of cool things about this animal. This bony ring of eyeball thing can help us understand how it sees. We can see how its ear probably worked. So we can understand a lot of cool biology about these guys. And what I really wanted you guys to understand is that these animals are really important to understanding reptile origins, today's crown group reptiles. And that work's happening here at ISU. You're going to see it when we go down to the museum and lab. Yeah, Trevor.
So the eyeball thing that you were mentioning. earlier,
Yeah.
Is that what you would traditionally describe as a scleral ring? or
Yeah, that's a scleral ring. That's a scleral ring. So there's bones within part of the eye anatomy of most vertebrates. Mammals, you guys don't have it. Have you ever seen like a bird skeleton or something like that? They often have that eyeball ring. The chicken you guys have all seen in lab, the pigeon you've all seen in lab has like eyeball rings. So they're just cool things that we can use to understand function. Paleontologists are always trying to figure out ways to like learn about the biology of extinct things that we're never going to get to see run around and do stuff. All right. Please accept my apologies for getting too into this. It's been like the research endeavor of my lab for the last few years. And so this reptile stem, Permian reptile evolution, is really important to me. And I think it's cool for you guys to know so much of it's been happening on your campus. Another point to make for today is that of the crown group reptiles, there's like the lizard snake side and the bird crocodile side. The bird crocodile side is called archosaurs, Ankyramorphs. Everything on the bird crocodile side is called Ankyramorpha. If you look up at those gray arrows, you'll see that the lizardy side, which is the lepidosaurs there on the left, they are only in the Triassic, whereas the Ankyramorph side does go into the Permian. So crown group reptiles, the common ancestor of all reptiles alive today, is a Permian animal. And that means things are interesting. I wanted you to see this because this is kind of what motivated my research into Permian reptiles in the first place. So this is a very, very, very dense phylogeny of all kinds of Permian and Triassic reptiles. You please don't have to read it. There's the mass extinction between the Permian period and the Triassic period. So time is going up. Carboniferous, Permian, Triassic. Okay. What you're seeing there, just like my gray arrows in lecture, those black blobs are representing the actual like time duration of all these different genera. So I can pick one, like let's pick this one here, Ararosaurus, one of the first dinosaurs. It's from this Carnian stage, this part of the Triassic right here. And then of course, you guys know, the lines all between are a phylogeny. If I orient you a little bit, there's the common ancestor reconstructed of like the lizard side and the croc bird side. There's your lizards and snakes and mosasaurs. We'll talk about them later. There's your dinosaurs. There's your crocodiles. Here's a whole bunch of weird Triassic stuff like pterodactyls. Don't worry about them yet. What I want you to do is tell me if this is supposed to be the origin of reptiles, and this is supposed to be the origin of the crown group reptiles, would you guys say that there's more fossils from the Triassic or the Permian? Talk to your neighbors about that. So I'm showing you this. This is one of the best figures we had. This is like from 2016, so 10 years ago. And so when I was becoming a new professor, this was the role I walked into. Amazing reptile stuff happening in the Triassic, almost nothing to talk about in the Permian. And that's why my lab did all the work you guys just heard about, which is like restructuring the reptile family tree so that we know that some of these lineages that people didn't think were related to today's reptiles actually go like here, 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 here. Really, really fun. So when I was a new professor at Idaho State, I was like just so mad because according to the current paradigm of reptile evolution, there weren't really good Permian reptiles. But that's still kind of true for the actual crown group. We should expect archosaurs and lizard and snake relatives in the Permian, and we don't really find them very much. So how come? This is some really interesting work that part of my dissertation was a part of. And so what you're seeing here is comparing all these different stars are places in the world where people find vertebrate fossils. And then that diagram that's connecting them, the closer they are, kind of like a phylogeny, kind of like an evolutionary tree, the closer they are, the more similar they are. And similar in the sense of like what kinds of animals are there and what abundance of those different kinds of animals there are. So you guys can see that in the South, there's a bunch of different places in South America and Africa and India that all kind of seem to be really similar, whereas the tropics are kind of weird on their own. And some of the stuff way up north kind of looks like the stuff that's way down south. And so how we interpreted this was like high latitude areas of Pangaea hosted really similar faunas of animals. That was really exciting to be able to show. And the tropics obviously seem quite different. Other people, like geologists and paleobotanists, can tell us there's like, oh yeah, different climates in different parts of Pangaea. And there's actually different plants in different parts of Pangaea. So wouldn't you expect the animal communities to like be distributed across Pangaea, not uniformly? It's not all the same across the supercontinent. Different areas of climate, different areas of different plants are going to have the different vertebrates living in them. That's really, really, really cool. This is a very complicated chart, but if I give you a little bit, I think you'll think it's actually kind of simple. Here's our equator. It's 0 degrees north. Here's south 20 degrees, south 60 degrees. There's 20 degrees north, 40 degrees north. And so these are the names of the different places, those stars I just showed you. So South Africa, Zambia, Tanzania, Morocco, Russia, China. That's Jungar up the top is China. And then all these bar graphs, they're all scaled to 100%. So we're not counting the number of fossils. We're just showing you the relative abundance, how much of each kind of vertebrate we find in each place. So if you go to Zambia, here's the percentages you're going to find of the different animals. If you go to South Urals, that's Russia, that's where you're going to find these different percentages of animals. So what's cool about this is if I'm sitting here being like, where are all my reptiles? Light blue are the crown group reptiles that we actually have on Permian Pangaea. So where's the light blue? Talk to your neighbors for a second. So where's the light blue? Where are these crown group reptiles in the Permian? Yeah, Ethan.
20 degrees north or south of the equator.
So we got some here, right? Some there. I think that's it. So near the equator. Now that's the crown reptiles. There's other reptiles too. There's those big bryosaurs you guys just saw. How are these bryosaurs distributed? The big, like, armored guys. How would you describe the distribution of those bryosaurs? Still kind of tropical. And actually the yellow, these are those like early lizardy looking guys I just showed you. Some of them can glide, some of them can swim, some of them are just your basic little lizardy guys. Also equatorial. And when we published this was like, this is really interesting. Because that means that like, if you go to these places where I go all the time, because these are some of the best fossils you can find from this time period, you're actually sampling these high latitudes, there's almost no reptiles to be found at all. Whereas if you go to the tropics, you're probably going to find them. I'll tell you guys, the problem is that these places in Niger and Morocco and the Southern Alps, places like Italy, they're actually not as fossil rich as we want them to be. It's really frustrating. There's tens of fossils from those places, whereas there's tens of thousands of fossils from these places. And so just like a fluke of the rock record is that we actually don't get good fossils forming in the place where these reptiles should be found. Very frustrating. That's what I just said. But what's cool is that the fossils we do have are pretty awesome. So this is the actual oldest fossil we have. That's a very nice and complete crown group reptile. This is an animal called Proterosaurus. It's on the crocodile bird side of reptile evolution. So within the reptile crown group, we got a couple whole skeletons of it. Kind of looks like a big, weird, long neck Komodo dragon monster kind of guy. Pretty big, you know, a couple meters long maybe. Really fun, but comes from those Southern Alps, places like Italy and Switzerland and places like that. So in the tropics, which must have been so hot, is where we find reptiles. But if we go to the high latitudes, north and south, it's more of like the mammal relatives that are really common. And I think that's really spicy because if you guys think about reptiles and mammals today, reptiles tend to like the tropics, whereas mammals are kind of like more broadly distributed. And that shouldn't be true for animals that are not true mammals or true reptiles yet, but it's something we kind of see. And so it's just very intriguing. What's really fun is that this body fossil of Proterosaurus is from the tropics, but we also have a lot of Ankyramorph trace fossils from the tropics. So we don't have their skeletons, but we have footprints. Look at the scales on this footprint. How great is that? These are also from Italy. And you can see they preserve foot anatomy. Digit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what's cool about that is you guys can see this is very different from the foot anatomy of the animal whose skeleton we actually have. And so we can make inferences based on the feet, where we don't have any body fossil, we only have the footprints of like how reptile evolution was happening. Here's Proterosaurus's foot right here. We don't have any body fossils in the Permian, but we do have footprints of like more quote unquote advanced, more derived reptiles from the late Permian that we don't have their skeletons yet. I think that's really fun and really cool. And so trying to get after these questions in paleontology, I'm only really like blabbing to you about this because like this is what I do and this is what I like so much, is like a real challenge. You have to understand so many different things in order to even understand what the problem you're really looking at is. And so here's that piece of art that you saw much smaller a few slides back. And this is the piece of paleo art that came out when that paper of those maps was published back in 2017, had a bunch of my dissertation data in it. And so this is a nice look at like equatorial Pangea, the plants, the climate, the animals we expect to find in equatorial Pangea. Almost all from body fossils, but this one right here, totally all we have is the footprints. So this is like a reconstruction of what it might have looked like, whereas everybody else has some bones going on. Do me a favor, just because I love this painting so much. Talk to your neighbors about it. What questions do you have? What seems cool? Okay.
That's good. Unless it was.
He's like, oh yeah.
All right, what stands out to you guys about this, just for fun? 1 minute left. I mean, come on. Yeah.
There's like a little red and blue lizard thing.
Yeah, okay, sure. This is what stands out. What I like about this is you guys have met a lot of these animals now in class. This is one of those captorinids, so grinding plants maybe, not even an amniote. Here's a very sad pariosaur. Maybe he's not sad anymore. And then a bunch of other pariosaurs. This is one of those little reptile relatives, like we segment here at ISU, teeny little guy. This is totally theoretical. But then this weirdo with the beak and the tusks, and then these living nightmares, these are on the mammal side. So we'll talk about them later. But there's this nice mix of non-amniotes, mammal line, reptile line animals all together. And I heard you guys talking about the plants. Yes, there's horsetails and ferns. There's also things like ginkgos and conifers. As you're getting a little bit nicer. Cool. All right. Thanks for letting me gush like that. We'll get back to mammal evolution on Thursday.